Law enforcement's chilling paranormal tales from Reddit. I am a police officer working on an emergency response team on a busy London borough. We took a call to a suspected domestic incident in a block of flats. The informant said that she could hear screaming and sounds of disturbance coming from the flat above her own. Once we arrived, my colleague and I knocked on the door of the flat the informant said the noise was coming from. I had heard nothing on my way up and certainly couldn't hear any disturbance coming from the address. To be honest, I heard nothing at all. After knocking twice, we had no response. My colleague left me to go downstairs and speak directly to the informant. I stayed by the door. I knocked again, and after some time it was answered by an elderly woman. She had clearly been asleep and was alarmed to see me standing outside. I told her that someone had called saying that they could hear a disturbance coming from within her address. I asked her if there was anyone else inside with her. She looked bemused and told me that she lived alone and had been sleeping. I asked her if I could come in to satisfy myself that no one else was there. She invited me in, and I walked into what was a small 2-bedroom flat. The flat was in darkness apart from her hall light and her bedside lamp. I began searching through the flat. As I approached the final door, the living room, my colleague called me up on the radio. He told me that he was on his way and asked if I was okay. I told him everything was fine, wondering why he sounded so flustered. He told me that he was with the informant and could also hear screaming and loud thuds coming from the flat I was in. I told him that he must be mistaken as I was almost done searching the flat and that I had heard nothing whatsoever. I have to admit a feeling of unease as I opened the final door. Like all the other rooms, it was in darkness, but was freezing cold. My breath misted immediately. There was no one in the room and no signs of disturbance. No window was open. I called my colleague and asked him to listen out for my footfall. He said he could hear my feet as I stamped them, but said that the screaming had stopped. This coincided with me opening the door. I left shortly after apologizing to the elderly woman for waking her. I have no rational explanation for this at all. My colleague and I left, feeling very creeped out. Late evening, maybe a decade ago, I ended up running silent to a call with additional units in tow. The caller reported hearing footsteps on her second floor when she was in the kitchen. She lived alone, middle-aged, divorced, no kids, and had no expected company. She's outside across the street when we arrive, obviously unnerved and being calmed by her neighbor. Other units showed up almost as I did and set up a perimeter at the corners of the property. We talk with her, get permission to enter, so we decide we'll announce ourselves and clear the house. 3 of us stack up on the front door, announce and make entry while the other officers are viewing the windows from a distance under concealment. She was in the midst of making a really late dinner, so the house smells really good. I remember how good it smelled. Anyway, we clear the ground level and make our way to the stairs when we hear it. Obviously footsteps on the wood floors above us. Not a panicky, "oh shit, I'm caught" footsteps, and running to hide or escape. No, these were calm, methodic, and almost pace-like. We announce ourselves again and no response, except the pacing just starts to sort of fade away. Quietly, I make my way up the steps, adrenaline pumping and concentrating on pieing the corner at the top. I stop a few stairs shy of the corner, breathe, and proceed up. The hallway at the top was pitch black, and after successfully clearing the top corner, we make our way down the hallway clearing rooms. Nothing. Nobody. Not even a critter. Not that any critter would ever make what I describe as human footsteps on hardwood. After the initial search, a few of the other officers involved also checked every nook and cranny, bed, closet, rack, hell. Even the washer, dryer, appliances, and cupboards were thoroughly searched. Nothing was out of order. Nobody was hiding anywhere. Eventually, we invite the lady back into her residence and reassure her that there was nobody in there, and we equated her noise to maybe wood shrinkage or expansion in the home. None of the officers outside and after our initial search had seen anybody leave the top or bottom floors or windows. The house had no indications that anybody tried to force open a window or door. I stayed behind for about 30 minutes once the other officers cleared the call and waited while her friend showed up to stay the night with her. I went over basic security measures with her and double-checked all her windows and doors were not compromised. She fed me well-done lasagna as I waited, and to this day, I'm convinced that I interacted with another dimension of life that day. About 4 years ago, a lady who I'll call Lucy called our non-emergency line and said she locked herself out of her house. I responded to take the report in case FD needed to force entry. I arrived first and immediately noticed a burning candle and some Jesus-y statues in the upstairs window. The light in this room was also on. I can't explain it, but it seemed a bit odd to me. Anyways, I approached Lucy, who appeared to be about 65 years old, and asked what happened. She said she walked to her car to get groceries for her and her mother, but forgot her keys inside and the door had locked behind her. I asked if her mother was home and Lucy replied in the affirmative. Lucy went on to say she technically lived alone because her mom died 6 years prior, but she still lives with her in the bedroom with the lit candle and makes her presence known by turning on/off lights, opening closing doors, and turning on the bathroom faucet. I then walked the perimeter of the home and found an unlocked window into the kitchen. Since Lucy never actually left home and knew no one else was inside, I radioed dispatch and climbed in through the window with her consent. As my boot touched the kitchen floor, I heard an audible click. At the same time, the lights in the stairway and upstairs hallway to my left turned off. I quickly walked to the rear sliding door to my right and advised Lucy what had happened. Lucy laughed and said that was just her mom saying hello. I told Lucy that although I genuinely believe what she told me was true, I still had to do my due diligence and ensure no one else was inside. I radioed for a back, and within minutes my buddy arrived. The first thing he asked about was the lit candle in the window. While clearing the upstairs, we came upon the room where the candle was and immediately noticed it was blown out. There were no open windows, fans, vents, or other obvious source that could have extinguished the flame. We just looked at each other with a bit of unease and went back downstairs to leave. Click, the upstairs lights turned off behind us. We talked to Lucy for another 5 minutes and suggested getting a battery-operated candle just to be safe. Well, Lucy clearly thought, fuck the police, because to this day, that candle burns in the open window most nights when I drive by. And every now and then I'll stop and talk to Lucy to see how she and her mother are doing. I worked at the Naval Hospital in Camp Pendleton in 2013. I was part of the transition team that moved the last of the belongings that they wanted from their old location to their new one. Along with others on my team, we were part of the final sweep as far as cleaning up, waxing the floors, and locking up some of the higher-level rooms within the old hospital. It was a nice gig because there was a ton of office supplies that was going to just get thrown away, along with some office chairs. I like to draw, so I took home 2 chairs, one for me and one for my roommate, along with a plethora of pens and paper. In my duty section, there was also the security role of watching over the barracks that was just outside of the hospital. With the Navy, being the Navy, they didn't transfer anyone over to the new barracks till about a full 8 months after the move to the new hospital. So someone still had to stand duty there, as well as patrol the old hospital, as to keep away any would-be vandals from a place they thought was completely abandoned. Of course, I would end up getting duty one day, and would start getting people coming into the commons area, telling to go, look at the hospital. There was very clearly a light on in 6th or 7th floor with a figure standing motionless watching outside. I put up a sign to say that I would be leaving the office and to call my personal number should they need anything. Usually, it was just to reset their key cards, but each room had 4 rooms within it, so usually people just called their roommates to open the doors instead of waiting for the process of me resetting their key card. It was already pretty late at night, so I wasn't worried about it. I would go to the hospital and it was still completely locked all around. I checked to make sure that no windows were ajar, but the hospital didn't have any that opened. I even tried to lift the back hatch that linens and new supplies came through by truck, and that was still secured. I had no other way of getting in myself, so when my chief came down around 2 a.m., as they seldomly did but were required to at least once a night, I made a report of it. By this time, the figure was gone, but the light remained on. I was never told if they ever found anyone or if it was even followed up on for that matter. But it was one of the creepiest things I remember from being there.
Not really scary, but possibly paranormal, and a case I was never able to solve. 3 years ago, I was called into an investigation of a burglary in a cemetery. When the forensics guys and I finally went out there, it was a slow morning. None of the responding deputies had actually gone inside yet. 4 deputies and a sergeant were busy securing the scene from the outside, because it was still dark out and they didn't want to go into the dark mausoleum that had been broken into. Apparently, they felt much safer with us overweight, non-sworn employees around, so we went inside together. The exterior door to the mausoleum had been forced open, and we started looking around for signs of anything stolen or vandalized. Eventually, we did find that one of the grave sites in the mausoleum, almost 15 feet off the ground, had the cement plaque shattered, and the coffin was pulled out and left sprawling on the floor. All contents of the coffin were missing, which including the cremated remains of 3 people, the last one who died in 2004. A person would have had to bring their own ladder to pull this out, or been at least 12-13 feet tall. According to the forensics guy, it looked like the plaque for the coffin had been shattered from the inside due to water damage. Still, it seems oddly coincidental that a plaque would simultaneously break on the night of a break-in to the mausoleum. It hadn't been accessed since 2004, so almost 12 years prior. The people in the gravesite had a single living relative. I called them, exchanged pleasantries, and then when I asked about the mausoleum, they said no habla English and hung up. It's probably drug-related somehow, but this is exactly the kind of thing that would happen at the start of a vampire or zombie apocalypse movie. I was a Met police officer serving with the Diplomatic Protection Group during the 80s. I was on night duty on protection of a government building in Carlton House Terrace in central London. It was in the early hours of the morning, and I decided to take a walk around the outside perimeter to check that all was well. I opened the front door to see a young boy standing about 12 feet away from me. He was wearing an Edwardian tweed cap, jacket, and +4 trousers and long socks. He was also carrying a heavy old-style leather football. Where this property is used a great deal for filming as it is very atmospheric. Think Sherlock Holmes. I said, "Hello, what are you doing here?" He smiled and bounced the ball. I realized that the ball made no sound upon striking the ground. I then saw standing behind him was a lady, late 30s, wearing a small straw hat with flowers and cherries on it. She was wearing a long cream cotton dress, Edwardian style with leg of mutton sleeves. She beckoned to the boy with her hand to come to her. He smiled at me and waved and joined the women. They turned away from me and vanished. I know that I was not dreaming. I requested a signal check on my radio to my control. Perhaps I had experienced a time slip. Military policeman in the Marine Corps. While stationed at Camp Lejeune, a dispatcher got a call from a terrified wife that kids were trying to get into her house. It was a little after midnight. We thought this was just a drunken spouse call and responded not on high alert, just kinda wanted to make sure the lady was all right. We knock on the door and announce ourselves. The woman is obviously shaken still with puffy eyes. She tells us 4 children with red eyes rang her doorbell and asked to come inside, and when she refused, they got angry. The kids terrorized her for the 5 minutes. Her own child was put to bed and her husband was deployed. I decide to do a once-over of the whole housing property, and it was a whole lot of nothing going on. My partner and I decide to do a little walking patrol of that housing area. In each housing area, there's usually a decent-sized playground. As we were walking up to it, we both see some kids swinging. Curfew is 8 p.m. for young children unless accompanied by an adult on base. I'm fucking spooked at this point, and I know my partner is too. They look over at us and just stare. We started backtracking and then turned, and didn't look back, didn't talk about it the rest of the night either. Later on, I looked up the incident online since Lejeune is famous for lots of paranormal activity, and turns out the little red-eyed kids have been reported before.